Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Northern Kentucky Forum. I'm Mark Nykirk, Director of the Scripps Howard Center for Civic Engagement at Northern Kentucky University. We are one of the members of the Northern Kentucky Forum, along with our three library districts, public library districts in Boone, Campbell, and Kenton County. And we are committed to bringing you discussions on public affairs in Northern Kentucky. We have had several of these forums as Zooms since the COVID crisis emerged, but you are with us for our first morning one. When we were in person, we had established a series of cafe sessions that began in the morning, try to catch you before work and offer you a cup of coffee and a Danish. And since we're not able to be together in person, it's a little harder to offer you a cup of coffee and a Danish, but we are trying to address that a little bit. We have a partner this morning, the Roebling Point Books and Coffee in Covington. They are by the Roebling Bridge. If you registered today or are with us this morning, you will get a certificate redeemable for a cup of coffee at Roebling Point, and also a discount on a book. The discount is 19.63% off on your purchase. That number is reflective of the date that the Brent Spence Bridge opened, since the Brent Spence is our topic this morning. I invite you to watch for the next forums that are upcoming at NKYforum.org. We have a pretty strong schedule coming up for the next couple of months. The next event is next Tuesday, or let's see, I think it's the, check the date if you don't mind. It's the 20th of April. Will be partnered with the NKU 6 at 6 series for a talk on justice and injustice in America. So I hope you can be with us. That's at 6 p.m. and we'll be coming to you live from the Southgate Street School in Newport. This morning, we are delighted to have as our guest Covington Mayor Joe Meyer, to talk with you about the city's view of what should happen regarding the Brent Spence Bridge, a project that has been in front of us for a number of years, and was attention to the need to do something with the bridge was heightened when the truck accident in November shut the bridge down for a period of months and let us know what it would be like if the bridge were not there, and heighten the attention on the need to do something. But what that something is and how to pay for it remains a significant topic in our public discourse. And recently, the Covington City Commission issued a statement that reflected the city's view of how this should proceed. And the forum thought it would be valuable to the community for us to hear it from the mayor on what that position is and the rationale behind it. Mayor Meyer also has agreed to answer all your questions. So if you'll just put those in the Q&A function, I will watch for those, and we will ask your questions at the end of this session, or if one is pertinent during the presentation, the mayor's will welcome that as we move along. So Mayor Meyer, if you'll join us, and we'll get started, and I will monitor for questions. And again, thanks everyone for being with us, and I'll watch for your questions. Mayor Meyer.
Thanks, Mark, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with the Northern Kentucky Forum, talking about a project that the City Commission of Covington has described as an existential threat to the city's future. I thought what I would do this morning is walk through a number of slides that tries to explain the overall project and the issues as we see it, and then get into whatever questions that you may have. I'd much rather interact with the audience by Q's and A's than just, you know, a one-sided presentation. So I'm not going to pretend I'm expert at technology. So if I screw it up, bear with me. We've got Chris will help me do this right if I need to, but I'll get into this little part of the project and we can start. So I do want to start with this map. This is the map of the project size. Over the years, we've heard replace the Brent Spence Bridge, and that's sort of become shorthand for the project. As you can see, the Brent Spence Bridge itself is just a minor part of the overall project. It literally starts 1,500 feet north of the Western Hills Viaduct, and it ends 2,300 feet south of Kyle's Lane. And the bridge is that little part crossing the Ohio River. And you can see that part of Fort Washington Way and I-71 is also included in the project area. And you'll realize the importance of this later on in the presentation. Covington's first concern is the scale of this project. This project has never proposed to replace the Brent Spence Bridge. It has always included keeping the existing bridge, spending ballpark $70 to $100 million to upgrade it. That will keep it strong and usable for the next 50 years. And then building next to it a new double-decker bridge. Now, as you can see, the pavement on the current bridge is 42 feet. That's not counting the superstructure or the ironwork or anything like that. The new bridge would have 128 feet of pavement. Overall, this more than quadruples the span of the bridge as it comes into Covington. So we encourage people to get up at Old Willie's, get up in Dubois Park and look at the bridge where it comes into Covington and try to imagine that behemoth being 4 times the width that it is. That is so hugely out of scale to Covington that truly it cleaves the rest of our city in half. You know, the interstate back in the 60s did severe damage to Covington's neighborhoods, particularly Lewisburg. This one would finish the job. So number one, way out of scale to Covington, needs to be downsized. Perhaps just as important, when people spend a couple of $1 billion, they expect, I think, the problem to be solved. Well, the plan does not solve the southbound congestion problem. Now, it would literally have 8 southbound lanes coming into Kentucky and then be back to 4 lanes just south of Kyle's Lane. You can imagine what it's going to be like going from those 8 lanes down to 4 when you're going up a 5-degree hill into the sun during the evening rush hour. Traffic is already backed up in the evening rush hour. All this is doing is relocating congestion from the north side of the river to the south side of the river. How do you fix this problem? The not so easy answer is that you have to widen I-75 from Kyle's Lane on down probably to I-71. That is literally more than $1 billion worth of extra expansion cost, assuming you can solve the interchange at I-275 and I-75. There's another fundamental issue here, and this one was best stated by the fellow from Cincinnati, the Ohio Department of Transportation's project manager for the Brent Spence Bridge project. And ODOT 6 years ago acknowledged that there are induced traffic problems with I-75. This is a quote: "The way Cincinnati is laid out, the more lanes you build on 75, the more traffic you draw, because you have the Norwood Lateral, you have Cross County Highway, you have the parallel route with I-71. We could continue to build lanes on 75, but they would fill because of the nature of the traffic network in the region." In other words, the region's traffic network is designed in such a way that it funnels all of the traffic into the I-75 corridor. And essentially that means that expansion of the corridor will be an exercise in frustration. It will not solve the problem, according to the ODOT engineers. When this was being studied, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet did a study and asked the question, what would happen to traffic if we had a $2 toll on the Brent Spence Bridge? And back 8 years ago, they said that of the 160,000 cars a day that crossed the bridge, 77,000 would get off the bridge to avoid a $2 toll and use all of the other bridges in the area. Now, our community has just gone through a real life experiment with diversion. Last November and December, when the Brent Spence Bridge was closed, an awful lot of that traffic found its way onto the streets of Covington, despite the best efforts by the state and the transportation planners to reroute traffic around our area. We found that the traffic on Main Street going to the Claywade Bailey Bridge was so intense that it actually killed the businesses in the main Strasse. Traffic was so heavy, customers just quit going there. We had major problems with truckers and others trying to find any route they could to get through the city. So we had several incidents where trucks got stuck at railroad passes because the bridges were too low and had to back up sometimes 2 or 3 blocks to turn around. We had cars and trucks going through residential neighborhoods, everybody trying to find a way out of the congestion. And severe damage to our neighborhoods, severe damage to our businesses, and no real hope for a solution to this problem if we wind up with this sort of diversion on a permanent basis. To put you into context, 77,000 cars a day. The state is proposing to build the I-69 bridge at a cost of $1.5 billion or so for a projected traffic flow of 30 or 35,000 cars a day. The state has just invested in expansion of the Mountain Parkway, hundreds of millions of dollars, to handle about 15,000 cars a day. This plan anticipates 77,000 cars a day on the existing infrastructure, but more importantly, without a penny to help pay for upgrades to that existing infrastructure. So for example, when we raise the issue with the Transportation Cabinet people and say, how are we going to handle 25,000 or 35,000 or 40,000 more cars a day on the streets of Covington? The state's answer was, we're not going to invest a penny. We want conditions to be so bad that people will want to get back on the interstate. Well, that's fine from one perspective, but from the damage it does to the environment in our neighborhood, that is an absurd and a ridiculous attitude to have. We also learned during the shutdown that the Roebling Bridge is at great risk. The Roebling of all the bridges truly is structurally limited. It's got weight limits. There are signs on it. We saw the traffic ignore all the signs. And at one time on a bridge with, I think it's a 20,000 pound weight limit, you had 4 80,000 pound trucks nose to tail crossing that bridge. We were truly, truly afraid of seeing portions of that bridge collapse. So we had to shut it down. Now, if diversion means that you were going to more than double the traffic on the Roebling Bridge, shouldn't there be some resources to pay to upgrade that bridge so we don't lose the icon? Now, folks will say, well, you know, that's just a projection. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Here's what happened in Louisville when they told the I-65 bridge. Traffic fell from 125,000 cars a day to 64,000 cars a day, a 49% reduction in traffic after spending hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade the bridge because people didn't want to pay the tolls. So I use this as evidence that the projections from the highway cabinet back in 2013 have a lot of basis in reality. And this shows that the probability of that diversion is very high. Without worried about just the permanent diversion, the construction period diversion is just as worrisome. During construction, the project proposed to have the 4th and 5th Street exits closed 2.5 to 3 years each. Now, there are about 50 businesses that are impacted by that closing. And so you'll wind up, the Mainstrasse will have a double whammy, and that is all that heavy traffic on Main Street due to folks getting off the interstate and coming down Pike Street and Dixie Highway and finding these other routes. But you're also losing the access to the interstate that occurs on a regular basis. And so you say, what sort of access, what are we talking about here in terms of volumes of cars? Southbound I-75, 4th and 5th Street exits handled 31,900 cars a day. Northbound handled 20,600 cars a day. So you're looking collectively at 50,000 cars whose access to and from the Mainstrasse businesses is severely limited. Once the project is finished, what do we have? Say, remember that big corridor? Well, access to Covington is actually reduced from what it is today. One would have to, what you're seeing here is a snapshot of what the signs would be like on I-75 southbound, just north of the museum center. Travelers would have to get into the extreme right side lane back at the museum center if they wanted to exit in Covington at 5th or 12th Street. If they're in any of the other lanes coming south, they would have to go all the way up to Kyle's Lane and turn around. How do you pay for this? The historical answer has been tolls. The bridge can't go forward unless there's a significant local tolling contribution. Tolls divide the region. They don't unite the region. They separate the region into winners and losers. Tolls and the economic burden associated with it will be a competitive marketing tool for folks depending on your perspective on tolls. And the tolls will create, and we're talking about a $2 toll, that's $1,000 a year. That's basically $1,000 a year tax on people who live in Kentucky and use I-75 to work in Cincinnati. So there are huge disincentives for people to live here, or more important, to do business in Ohio. We have many companies in Covington, the bulk of whose business is actually north of the river. And if all of a sudden they're having to deal with tolls, they are incentivized to relocate over to the Ohio side. And tolls have been talked about only for the bridges. In a minute, I'm going to talk about this equity situation, where right now the proposal is that only the people who cross the bridge pay the toll. The other option that they've come up with recently, well, actually they revitalized, is if we're going to do this, we have to toll all the bridges as a means to reduce the diversion. If you begin to toll all of the bridges, you wind up with situations where folks from Claremont County who work in downtown Cincinnati would pay 4 tolls a day because they cross the river twice on their trip to work. And I don't know that that is politically feasible. Here's the toll equity issue. Again, you see where the Brent Spence Bridge is. The overall cost of this project is listed on the side. The Ohio improvements from the river to north of the Western Hills Viaduct are over $1 billion. The bridges themselves are $700 billion, and the Kentucky approaches are the $630 million. And then you throw in the rent, if you will, for the engineering firms, and you get your $2.6 billion total. The concept that our states have agreed to is that Kentucky will pay Kentucky's work, Ohio will pay for the work in Ohio, and the cost of the bridge will be split 50-50. Collectively, that means that Ohio would pick up 60% of the cost of the project, and Kentucky would pick up 40% of the cost of the project. Of the local traffic that uses the I-75 bridge, the Brent Spence Bridge, 65% of the local traffic is Northern Kentuckians getting to work in Cincinnati. So we wind up with a situation where the Kentuckians who go to work in downtown Cincinnati pay the toll. The folks in Ohio who are driving along the most expensive part of the project to get to downtown Cincinnati to work pay no toll. And so this is a matter of simple equity and fairness. If people are going to have to pay tolls to use these improvements, then everybody who uses the improvements needs to be paying the tolls. The people in Ohio have to pay the tolls so that the burden of the tolling, the economic advantages and disadvantages, and the political cost of tolling are shared by all of us. So what's Covington been asking for? We're asking to reduce the size of the Brent Spence Bridge. In fact, the revised traffic projections are significantly lower than what they were 5 or 6 years ago. Plus, we're on the cusp of major change. Just a few weeks, about a month ago, Mark Polisinski, who's head of OKI, talked to the Covington Business Council's forum, talking about self-driving cars, self-driving trucks, and their impact on the capacity of our highway system. Once those self-driving vehicles come along, the effect is to significantly increase the capacity of the existing system. So realistically, we need to reduce the size from proposed 16 to 12, or better yet, 10. Secondly, we believe that there has to be some mitigation of the impact of diversion. It's going to happen, but we have to provide the resources to upgrade Covington's infrastructure, and indeed the infrastructure of all the communities that'll be impacted by diversion, so that we are not living in a constant nightmare. Thirdly, we have been asked that the transportation advocates protect and compensate Covington's businesses that will be negatively impacted by diversion. Realistically, what do you think is going to happen to the Radisson Hotel if the 4th and 5th Street interchanges are closed? It's just not going to be able to survive. All of the fast food restaurants that we have in that part of town will have their access severely restricted, and at huge economic costs. And why should we ask these businesses to bear a significant economic cost for the sake of what some are calling a regional benefit? And finally, we're saying no tolls on the Clayway Bailey and the suspension bridges, so that we can have reasonable commerce between Covington and Cincinnati unimpeded by this extra burden. What do we believe? We believe that while the powers that be try to figure out the next steps and how to pay for it, let's put in place these interim solutions to reduce the northbound traffic congestion. Covington proposed several years ago the realignment of the 4th Street entrance ramp so that instead of going directly from 4th Street onto the Brent Spence Bridge, the entrance ramp would go beneath the expressway and wrap around and join the Pike Street entrance ramp, so that once the Pike Street entrance ramp hits the expressway, there's currently 4 lanes. The expressway would stay 4 lanes all the way across the bridge. The studies have indicated that this will significantly reduce the accidents that are on the bridge, that it will enhance the speed that travelers can attain while they are on the bridge. It will give people a whole lot more time and space to move from the I-71 lanes into the I-75 lanes. So this is now scheduled. The Federal Highway Administration has approved it. And once the bridge painting is done, the Texas turnaround and the realignment of the 4th Street northbound entrance ramp should begin. And we think that'll have a very positive flow on traffic in the mornings. The more important thing is that the highway planners have to revisit the assumptions and the timing of the Brent Spence Bridge project based on our current circumstances and work to redesign and replan the project accordingly. So here's a little map, if you want, showing you how the 4th Street ramp would be realigned. And whenever you hear the engineers talk about how the Brent Spence Bridge is functionally obsolete, all of the bridges over the Ohio River are functionally obsolete, except for the Roebling Suspension Bridge, which is in a worse category. I will also point out that from an engineering perspective, every house in Covington is functionally obsolete because none of them meet the contemporary building code requirements. All of our great historic homes would be functionally obsolete. So this has become a buzzword to suggest that the bridge is in worse shape than it is. Structurally, it's in fine shape. It's going to be here forever. And functionally obsolete just means that if it were built today, it wouldn't meet today's design standards. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the bridge. So with that, I'm more than glad to answer any questions that people may have.
Joe, one of the first questions we have is, what about the bypass idea? Is that still live? And what are your and the city's thinking on that?
Well, we firmly support the bypass. Go back to that quote from the fellow from the Ohio Department of Transportation, where he said the Cincinnati traffic network is designed in a way that funnels all of the traffic into the I-75 corridor. That's a fundamental problem. When you hear bridge advocates say that the Brent Spence Bridge is the second biggest bottleneck bridge in the country, they're actually referring to the I-75, I-71 interchange on the north side of the bridge. And I think we will all agree that when you're coming from I-71 onto I-75, in the Fort Washington Way area and all that, it's a nightmare. It is totally frightening. That is where the bulk of the congestion that the national folks talk about exists. Way back in the 1960s, OKI proposed a series of transportation master plans for greater Cincinnati. And one of their ideas was an outer loop, one that would travel through Claremont and Warren counties and hook up with I-75 and I-71 well north of I-275. It was a good idea then. We think it's a good idea today. The issue simply is that you have 3 interstates using one bridge. That's I-75, I-71, and I-74. Remember that for the southbound folks. The eastern bypass was laid out and designed in such a way that all the through truck traffic could use the eastern bypass at a cost of about 5 or 6 minutes, more than normal speed time on I-75, and therefore a considerable saving during periods of high congestion. So in terms of traffic management, we believe that going around, having the through truck traffic avoid the Cincinnati Basin area is a benefit. The other thing that we talk about and we have in the back of our mind is economic growth. You only have to have been here in 1960s when I-75 was built and to recognize the change that has occurred between then and now, principally because of I-75 and the way it was laid out. Boone County had 25,000 people. There was no Florence Mall. There was not much of Florence. And look at those areas today because of the transportation access. Look at the business investment we've had because of the transportation access. So a key question that we get to ask is, do we want to spend this $1 billion, or from Kentucky's perspective, at just $1 billion, changing I-75 between the Ohio River and Kyle's Lane? And for what economic benefit? There's only going to be an indirect benefit to us. The people who are driving through maybe get through faster, but it's not opening any new land. It's not creating an opportunity for new investment. No, every bit of ground is already occupied. But if you use the eastern bypass and make a commitment to it, then you will create the opportunity for the next 50 years, like what we've experienced the last 50 years, and which is a smarter use of our resources. And I would submit very simply that the eastern bypass invests in economic growth for our future far more significantly than expanding and changing this little bit of I-75 north of Kyle's Lane. One of the other benefits of the eastern bypass is that you can come up with alternative financing mechanisms. You could, for example, incorporate a tax increment financing district at all of the proposed interchanges, so that a significant percentage or some percentage of the revenue growth attributable to those interchanges can be used to pay for the highway improvements that made it all possible. That's not an option we have today. It would certainly be an option for the future. So from a transportation planning, from a straight planning perspective, for the sake of the grid, the transportation grid that serves Cincinnati, from an economic development perspective, from a through traffic truck diversion perspective, we believe that the eastern bypass is valid and significant and should absolutely be undertaken.
Mayor, the Texas turnaround idea, we have a question. Really, essentially, would you just kind of explain that a little more? I think the picture I'm getting is if I'm coming north on I-75 right now from, let's say, from Florence, and I come through Fort Wright, as I come down the hill into Covington, past 12th Street, I get slowed down by the merging traffic of people coming, entering the, and what this would do is eliminate one of the merges. But if you just take a minute to kind of lay that out a little more, what is the advantage of that, and how quickly could that be done? Just there's some interest in exactly what that option and intermediate step, the benefits and how it works.
Good question. Right now, when you come down the hill, you're 3 lanes. When Pike Street enters, it widens to 4 lanes. And then just before 4th Street, it narrows back to 3 lanes. When 4th Street enters on the bridge, it widens back to 4 lanes. So you have 3 to 4 to 3 to 4. And in fact, people tell me that once they hit the bridge, traffic speeds up. So the bottleneck is not the bridge as much as the 3 to 4 to 3 to 4 routine. The Texas turnaround would take it would eliminate the 4th Street ramp as it currently exists, take it under I-75, south along the west edge of I-75 to Pike Street, then turn into and become part of the Pike Street entrance ramp. And it would be separately designed so you wouldn't have to re-enter the local street grid or anything. There wouldn't be any traffic signals. It would be a straight flow of traffic. And then once Pike Street hits the expressway, the 4 lanes will stay the 4 lanes all the way across the bridge. So 3 lanes to 4 lanes at Pike Street, 4 lanes all the way across the bridge. It eliminates that bottleneck, that 4 to 3 to 3 to 4, 3 to 4 weaving situation completely. Does that help explain it?
I think so, although there's a question from somebody else that's related to this, and I'm going to just read the question so that there's no lack of clarity about what's being asked. How do you explain what seems to be a contradiction in your argument, which is that you have concerns that traffic will destroy business in downtown Covington, yet you argue that the new configuration cuts off access to 5th Street in Covington? Further, you support the bypass project that seems to further draw investment and development away from the downtown area.
The first part of it, the 4th Street entrance ramp will not be eliminated. It will simply be realigned. So people will have to take an extra 2 minutes to get onto the Brent Spence Bridge. Yeah, but we don't see that as a cost. The eastern bypass would be used to divert principally the through traffic. The through traffic doesn't stop in Covington much at all anyway. So we don't see that as being any particular loss of a business opportunity. We are concerned about the other extreme, where the traffic volume is so heavy that business opportunity is lost, because if people don't want to stop, they don't want to park, they don't want to sit on the sidewalk because of the smell of the diesel and the fumes and all the problems associated with traffic. Did I get both sides of that question answered?
I think so, but I'll watch for a follow-up in the Q&A if the questioner thinks otherwise. We have the next question. The Brent Spence Bridge does not currently have emergency lanes, which has resulted in numerous accidents and deaths. Why has Covington waited so long to object? And having driven northbound from across the Brent Spence Bridge, I can tell you that drivers switch lanes to access I-75, 71 all the way across the bridge. The Texas turnaround will not solve that problem.
Well, 2 issues. The I-471 bridge does not have emergency lanes either. And as Covington has been raising these issues for several years now. Matter of fact, in preparing for this, I pulled out the very first time I did this discussion. It was in 2015. Okay, so we're already 6 years into pointing these issues out and trying to get some action taken. And interestingly, this is a significant failure of the transportation planning system. These impacts on Covington businesses, Covington people were easily identifiable. The simple fact is nobody cared. Okay, we care, and we are comfortable in raising these issues and saying it is not fair, it's not equitable, it's not just for Covington people and businesses to have to pay the cost associated for this regional benefit. If it's going to truly benefit the entire region, then the region should bear the expenses, direct, financial, and otherwise, and not just a handful of folks who are in the city of Covington. So we've been singing this song for a long time. We are glad that people are finally beginning to pay attention to us. And I think from the feedback we've gotten, a lot of people agree that the issues that we are raising are appropriate. And there was another part of the question that I've forgotten.
Essentially that the Texas turnaround won't solve the problem of the weave across the bridge.
Well, you'll still have traffic move from the I-71 lanes into the I-75 lanes, but whereas now if you get on at 4th Street, you have basically the length of the bridge to move from right to left. If you're doing it from Pike Street, you have a considerably greater distance to move from right to left. And again, the studies that in this case were developed to analyze this proposal indicated a significant safety and traffic flow improvement as a result of eliminating the 3-4-3-4 weaving and giving people a much greater distance to move from the 71 to the I-75 lanes. And I will tell you, it could be made a whole lot better if the folks on the Cincinnati side would make some minor adjustments to their part of the expressway so that right now the right 2 lanes have to get on I-71, the left 2 on I-75. With some minor adjustments on the Ohio side, the left 3 lanes could use I-75. Ohio's been unwilling to make that investment. We hope they change their mind because we think it would improve the benefit of the proposed changes on the Kentucky side even more.
Mayor, this next question is almost more of just a statement, but I'm going to, my inference is if assuming the facts are correct, what reaction might Kentucky do? And the question is, are you aware that the Ohio Department of Transportation is paying for much of their portions themselves without a toll?
Of course they are, which is also an interesting part of the tolling question. If they're paying it without the toll, why are they collecting proposed to collect 60% of the tolls that cross the bridge? Okay. They're just going to be using it to fund other projects in Ohio, which is well and good. I mean, I don't blame them for that, but it's just another revenue source to Ohio. And it really isn't specifically used to pay for the overall corridor project. I acknowledge that.
Could you talk for a minute about the narrative on the bridge has really been around tolls or no tolls, and right now we have, I believe, state legislation that prohibits tolls. The case that you're making today is more that the debate around the bridge should be exactly what it should, what size and scale it should be, and whether it should be paired with other projects. How has it come to be that our discussion of this project has focused so much on the toll or no toll question rather than on what kind of bridge we want?
Sometimes the way you define a problem gives you the answer. And the question that was raised in this issue is what's the best way to deal with the overall traffic issues that we're having here in the I-75 corridor. Yeah, it was instead the question was, how do we deal with the Western Hills Viaduct to Kyle's Lane? So they never were put into the situation of asking the broader question of the fundamental nature of the transportation network in greater Cincinnati and whether any improvements to that corridor would in fact solve those problems. Yeah, I think the ODOT engineer was totally correct. No matter what we do, we won't solve the problem. It'll just grow because of that fundamental problem. So that's part of what we're talking about. The second part is we left all this to the planners, and it really, I don't think the public understands. I know they didn't understand back then. I certainly believe today they don't understand very well that when we talk about the Brent Spence Bridge, we're not talking about the bridge. We're not talking about replacing the bridge. We're talking about this whole corridor concept, and nobody really focused it. You know, when I tell people, you know, that initial slide that I showed, showing that 128-foot behemoth next to the 42-foot behemoth, that's been there for 6 or 7 or 8 years. And until we started bringing specific attention to it, nobody put their minds there. We all know the bridge is a mess. We all know something better needs to happen, but we haven't been in a position where we've known sufficient details to make good judgments. And quite frankly, I think it's an absolute failure of the planning process. The nature of interstate development in this country is such that across the nation, states and cities are decreasing the footprint of interstates in their urban cores. This one goes exactly the opposite direction and enhances it. So, we should be talking about this from a design perspective. And quite frankly, if we hadn't been successful in getting the law changed to ban tolls, we never would have been in a position to talk about the design considerations because it had such a head of steam. The business interests and the advocates had $2 million that they spent on lobbying to get the approval for the tolls back in the day because they wanted it built at whatever cost. The tolling question enabled us to examine the bridge design question. And while we're at that, here's one other point that I want to make very specifically. When these folks talk about a 2.6 billion bridge increased by inflation, et cetera, they are massively understating the required investment. Why? Because unless you're willing to accept congestion in Kentucky at going up the hill to Kyle's Lane is a permanent fixture, you're going to have to widen I-75 in Kentucky. That's another $1 billion+ if you are going to protect the rolling suspension bridge, and if you are going to upgrade the other infrastructure elements, the streets in our cities. I-275 gets a bulk of the traffic diversion off of the I-75. You're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars more in investment. So when we talk about what this thing is going to cost, it's not going to be 2.6 billion. It's going to be 5, 6, 7 billion. We'll pay it now, we'll pay it later. From a planning perspective, the analysis ought to be the totality of the cost, which would begin with appropriate design.
As long as we're on design, if I could ask another somewhat different question. Some years ago, when this discussion was a little newer, there had been some discussion about what the bridge might look like and whether it might be a signature bridge, as long as we were investing in this. And you think about our 19th century predecessors, they built a beautiful bridge that we still look at today. Is there any discussion that, regardless of whether this project is at the scale that you're suggesting or the larger scale, about what it would look like, or are we just going to have a functional industrial looking bridge? Is that sort of discussion in the discourse at all?
I don't know. I do know we're talking about and in the planning stages to replace the Veterans Bridge, or the bridge that connects Covington and Newport at 4th Street. And I know that Covington has advocated for an iconic design for that bridge replacement. When we do these major infrastructure projects, I don't think it behooves us to be cheap. We ought to have something that, from a design perspective, that we can be proud of, that we can rejoice in, that brings a smile to our face or adds to a great sense of place. And that's what good design does. So I hope the transportation engineers do come up with a really good design, a pleasing design for when the decision on the bridge is finally made.
We have a question about timing, which boils down to if your idea of what should happen to the Brent Spence Bridge were to be accepted, what would be the timeline for implementation? Is it any different for the others, or just what does timing look like?
Well, I'm not on the inside of the specifics of the engineering timing, but if you go through a redesign, which I think is there's pretty well a consensus now that there has to be a redesign. You're looking at years, not one or two, but 4, 5, 6, 7 before you even begin the project. And then you're looking at what, 3 or 4 years, 5 years of construction.
We have a question that a little bit of debate with you. I'll read it. I-75 requires fewer lanes at Kyles Lane since trucks can resume normal speed once they finish climbing the hill. To say there will be a major log jam there is misleading.
All I know is that when you were going up the hill today at rush hour, traffic is backed up. When you are widening the capacity, going from 4 lanes to 8 lanes southbound, you are increasing the capacity. And a lot of the congestion that currently exists north of the river will simply be moved south of the river because you're up the hill into the sun, into that bottleneck. And our folks firmly believe that the traffic congestion will increase. And here's why that's important to Covington, because Covington and Covington alone pays for all the police, fire, and ambulance services that serve that part of the expressway. So here we are designing an element that will increase the demand for public services that are paid for just by Covington taxpayers.
Remind the audience we're going to wrap it up here shortly. So if you have any final questions, post them. But Mayor, I have a question, if I might. You've talked about design and planning, and Covington, I can see in your background the old IRS site. You have a fairly major plans for a prime piece of real estate near the river and connect it to so all of the infrastructure involving I-75 and the bridge would affect that, I presume. So could you just, maybe it's helpful to tell this audience what the current plan is for that site and what concerns you might have about how what happens on the interstate might affect the planning and ultimately what happens there.
Covington acquired title to the IRS site last summer. Our master plan for it's about a 23 acre site bounded by 4th Street on the south, 2nd Street, River Center Boulevard on the north. That site was done in the spirit of urban renewal, where the entire street grid and hundreds of houses were all torn down and a massive suburban style site established and one building on top of it. What we are planning to do is to undo all that. We intend to restore the urban grid so that the feel and the experience of what is now the IRS site will be like Licking Riverside, like Roebling Point, like Muttergata, like Mainstrasse. So we are going to take 3rd Street where it ends now at Madison Avenue and run it all the way over to the Clayway Bailey Bridge. We're going to take Russell Street and run it on up to 2nd Street. There were several other smaller streets. Washington Street was in there. So we're going to restore a number of those streets so that that site is reincorporated into the urban experience that has been Covington's history. Now, one of the interesting features is that 4th Street in Covington and the top of the flood wall are at approximately the same elevation. In other words, right now, the elevation from 4th Street used to go down to the river. Well, we're going to take advantage of that by having that Russell Street Boulevard go on and head to the top of the flood wall, so that where 2nd Street is, that'll be underground, if you will. We'll have parking and some various amenities there. But in addition to reincorporating that area into the city, we want to be able to reincorporate our access to the Ohio River and make experience in the river once again a positive part of the Covington experience. Now, from the development perspective, obviously, if we were in the middle of a 4-year or a 5-year reconstruction project on I-75, it would have a significant impact on the timing of the developments for the IRS site.
One final question was we need to wrap up. I think it's fair to say from a statewide perspective that there's been little motivation, say, from Frankfort to move forward because there's no evident consensus in Northern Kentucky about what to do, most exemplified by our division about whether to have tolls or not. But this other layer of disagreement about what the scale and nature of the bridge is just further insinuates that we're not united in our voice about what we would like to see happen. Is there a way for that to be accomplished? And the further complication is it's not just our 3 counties and cities, but it's 2 states. So how do we, I think there's general agreement that something ought to be done, but what and how there is not. Is there a way to reach that kind of agreement, or are we in perpetual discord?
Mark, Northern Kentucky is absolutely its own worst enemy. We continue to be voluntarily fragmented into all of our little counties and all of our little cities with all of our little fiefdoms. And as a result, there's nobody that's got any responsibility for the big picture of anything. And so when it comes to a project like this, that really does impact all of us, we were sidelined. We were mere advisors, observers during the planning process to the extent that it was. We were never in a position to take the lead, to cause these types of questions. And when I say we there, I mean Northern Kentucky, just not Covington. So as long as we prefer to be what we are, divided the way we are, we will continue to be ineffective politically in addressing the major issues, transportation, social issues, economic growth issues, racial justice issues in Northern Kentucky, and we will continue to be relatively ineffective in Frankfort because we're too easy to divide and conquer.
Mayor Meyer, thank you very much for being with us. Attendees, thank you for joining us and for your questions. And I hope you'll join us for other forums. We'll be trying some morning ones again, as well as back in the evening. So whatever fits into your schedule, we hope you can make all of them. I remind you that by attending today, if you registered, then we will send you an email with a gift certificate, a credit to get a cup of coffee at the Roebling Point Coffee and Books, as well as a discount coupon on a book of your choice from the bookstore there at the foot of the Roebling Bridge. Also, I'd like to point out there's a great opportunity to come to Covington this weekend. Joe, I guess every day is an opportunity to come to Covington, right? But Saturday from 2:30 to 7:30, Roebling Point and its neighbor Lil's Bagels is hosting a fundraiser for flood relief for the Red River Gorge. So come down and help out the folks at the gorge and have a cup of coffee on us. You'll find the farmers market nearby and other amenities to enjoy in downtown Covington. And so I hope you're able to do that. Again, thanks for being with us. And Mayor, we appreciate your time, and have a good day, everyone.
And Mark, let me also thank you, thank the forum, and thank those who observed and participated in this today. I think it's great that people are willing to get engaged in these issues. Obviously, I'm presenting very much Covington's perspective. I hope that we can all come to the conclusion that when this project goes forward, it has to be something that does in fact either benefits all of us or at the least does no harm. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to have this discussion. Thank you, Mark.
You're most welcome. And it's going to get a little colder today, so everybody bundle up and take care of each other. All right. Thank you.
So we went for an hour, Mark.
That's good.
Yeah.
Interest was there. So
Good.
and thanks again for doing it. We're Chris, it's the